Continuing on with our outstanding guest speaker series, today the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab is proud to present Jackie Graziano. After spending several years in publishing and advertising, she changed career paths and went into library and archival work, receiving her MLS from Queens College with a certificate in archives and records management. She was fortunate to land the job as archivist with Westchester County in 2007. The archives is a resource for all county departments, as well as the general public. Jackie handles all research questions, oversees the archives reading room, and is in charge of preservation for the archives collection, which includes digitizing records. Today's presentation will be on using original records for genealogy, highlighting records in the collections of the Westchester County archives that are most helpful for genealogy. The archives is the repository for the Westchester County's historic government documents from the late 17th through the early 20th centuries. She's going to discuss primary sources, provide some strategies for locating records, and give a few examples of how original records can help genealogists get past those notorious brick walls. So with that, I'd like to offer a wonderful and warm virtual welcome to Jackie.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today, and thank you, Suzanne, for inviting me to speak and for hosting this opportunity for me to talk about our collections here at the Westchester County Archives. As Suzanne said, I'm the senior archivist here now. I've been here for almost 14 years. It's been quite an adventure. And I really enjoy my work, so it's fun to talk about it, and I thank you for your attention. So here's a look at our oldest official record in Westchester. It's the will of a man named Philip Galpin. It's from March 1684. It's the first record in our first book of records in Westchester. It is, in fact, was later labeled Library A of Deeds because it primarily contains deeds, which was the bulk of the early records that we have from Westchester. But there are some wills, there's some marriages, and some very other odds and ends in that book. I love the handwriting. It is actually English, even though it looks like it might be another language. And this book is just, it's really fun to look through. You might be able to see from around the edges of the pages that these front pages were kind of fragmentary, and when we sent it for conservation, they kind of rebuilt the page around it, which was very interesting to read about that process. But this is our oldest surviving record from our oldest surviving book, so I like to show that off because it's fun to look at. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. I'll give you a little bit of information about the county archives. Just briefly talk about primary and secondary sources for those of you who are new to genealogy and using original records. And then, because this is my area of expertise, I will make the case to use original records for your research, talk about what kinds of original records are available, what records in our collection are most useful for genealogy, how to locate original records using records for overcoming brick walls, and then a few last things that I always talk about in almost every presentation about documentation and visiting repositories. And then, of course, there's time for question and answer at the end, but I'm okay with answering questions along the way. If somebody has something that you want to put in chat or raise your hand digitally or however Suzanne handles it, I'm happy to answer questions along the way. If it's something that I'm going to be covering shortly, I might just say, okay, hold on, we'll get to that, but otherwise I'm happy to answer questions. So about the Westchester County Archives, as I mentioned, Suzanne mentioned in the intro, we are the repository for Westchester County's historic government records. We are a part of Westchester County government. We hold records from the very beginning of when Westchester County had the official county clerk's office was created in 1683, and our earliest record, as you saw, dates from 1684. The bulk of what we have that's useful for genealogy actually starts after the Revolutionary War, 1783, and runs up to about the early 20th century, but the archives is actually much more than just what we use for genealogy. We also contain records from the law department, the district attorney's office, the parks department, There's a lot that county government does, but a lot of those are not for use for genealogy, so I will be focusing on the records we use for genealogy. As I mentioned, county government dates back to the 1680s. Our records run up to the present, but again, the majority of what we have for genealogy kind of runs into the early 20th century. After that, that kind of stuff tends to be more locally kept rather than at the county level. It depends on the type of record, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The archives was created in 1985. The man who was then the county clerk, Andrew Spano, had been a history teacher. He noticed there were a lot of old record books lying around on the shelves in the clerk's office that nobody was using. They didn't know what they were. They were old and dusty, and some of them were not in good condition. And he looked at them and said, these are valuable old record books that date back to the 17th century. These should be available for research. They should be in good storage. And so he started the process that created the archives. We are housed outside of the county seat, which is White Plains, where the county offices generally are. And that's standard archival practice. You never keep your records where your main office is, just in case something happens to your office. The records have to be protected. So they spent 4 years organizing, collecting, and rehousing the records in proper archival storage. They created a temperature and humidity controlled vault for storage of the records. And then the reading room opened in 1989. And we've been here in the same building serving Westchester County public, but the public at large. We're a resource for anybody who's interested in Westchester history ever since then. And what's really wonderful about our facility is that the Westchester County Historical Society, which is a separate nonprofit organization that contains a library with general Westchester history, joined us in the building in 1991. So anybody who comes to our facility to use the archives records also has the Historical Society's collection, and they are wonderful. They have books on local history, files on families, newspapers, periodicals, manuscripts, and they date back actually earlier than the archives. The Historical Society has been around since I think the 1850s, so they've got a very good library. What we do, we are a research and storage facility here. We serve the public as a research resource. I answer reference questions, not just for county employees, but also for the general public. And of course, we store records, we do preservation, we digitize, and we have a wonderful volunteer program. There's a lot of great people who work with us helping index and preserve records. So just to quickly talk about primary and secondary sources, I made a list of each. You know, in some cases you can kind of argue the lines blur, I think, a little bit in some cases, and I myself prefer the term original records instead of primary sources, but that's just a personal preference. But you might, if you look down the list of primary sources, one thing that they all have in common, the ones that I've put here anyway, is that these are all government records. And so governments are actually a prime function of government is to keep records and to store records. And that makes government offices a very good resource for genealogy records. Secondary sources tend to be, as I should probably clarify, primary sources are records created by people who have firsthand knowledge of an event. So very often anything that a government office is doing is recording an event in somebody's life or in the creation of their work, the process of doing their work. So you'll see, you know, deeds have to do with recording sales of land. And that's a very important thing that has to be kept on file forever, because sometimes you need to go back and look. And the importance of having that together in one central office where it's always going to be kept together in one place provides some stability, continuity, and reliability for knowing that those records are going to be there. Secondary sources are compiled usually from multiple of sources. They aren't necessarily created by people who have firsthand knowledge of an event. They were often created later on. So that's why they're called secondary as opposed to being primary. So again, let's talk about why I encourage people to use original records for genealogy. What is an original record, also known as a primary source? It's a record that was created at or near the time of an event. It was created by people with firsthand knowledge of that event. The question to ask when you're trying to figure out if a source is a primary or secondary source is who provided the information. Someone who's close to the time of the event, or first person involved in that event, is going to have the most accurate information. The farther you get away from an event, the more the information is retold. You're getting farther away, and it becomes less reliable. So that's why I like to encourage people to use original records, because they were, of course, the closest to when the event happened. Original records are often, not always, but often stored by the organization that creates them, which, again, as I mentioned, creates a sense of stability and continuity, reliability of those records. They weren't moved from place to place. You've got, hopefully, a good creation of these records that they haven't been dispersed somewhere. They're kept together. They provide context for each other because there's other similar records together with them. They'll tell you something about the history and the character of the locale, which has some impact on how people lived and what sort of activities they participated in, and just about the people, how they lived, who they were. And generally, as I mentioned, a local government is going to be the creator and storer of records that are useful for genealogy. Again, why use the original records? Well, not everything is online yet. And why isn't Ancestry and Family Search are wonderful resources, and all those genealogy sites. They do have tremendous amount of records. They do a wonderful job of partnering with people and becoming a central repository for providing a wide reach for records. But there are lots of original records that are not online, and it's generally because especially older records are going to be in a fragile condition, which requires special handling, expensive equipment, and it takes time to get a good scan of a very old record, especially if it's in a fragile condition. Staffing, we used to have 5 archivists here. We're down to 1 full-time archivist because of attrition, the past 8 years or so. The thing with government offices is it depends on who's in charge and what their focus, what their priorities are. So a previous administration, we were not a priority for them, and our staffing has kind of ebbed some. We're hoping to build that up again, but lower staff means less opportunity to do things like digitizing records. And that's the case in a lot of archives and libraries, unfortunately. Importance of these kinds of jobs kind of ebbs and flows, and so when there's lots of staff, lots of projects get done. When there's less staff, less projects get done. And equipment is expensive. We do have some very good scanning equipment, but again, it's time and staffing ability to use them. A question about using original records: which is the original? If you can locate who created and stores the original record, that's wonderful. But there is, of course, the possibility that someone created a copy somewhere along the way, and that is what is actually scanned and put online. So how do you know which is the original copy? Anytime something is transcribed or copied, there's a possibility that there was an error made. So you want to trace back, and that is I don't know how many of you have worked with the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, but working with them, I've sort of absorbed their philosophy that if you can possibly look at all copies of something, you should, because there is the possibility of changes in words, changes in name spellings across different copies. So it's always a good idea, if possible, to look at each copy and to try to determine which one was the original. Original records provide accuracy and completeness, especially if you are looking at a copy that's online. It's a good idea to try to trace down the original and confirm that the information that you found online is in fact accurate. I'm sure many of you have been doing research for a while, have run into this situation where people have cut and pasted information from people with the same name without checking to confirm that the information was accurate. I've had people come here and look at wills to be able to determine which person is the person that they're actually researching, to be able to sort them out from distinguishing information in the record, which is the person who's the one that they're actually researching, and that can often be found in original records. The wills on family search were taken from copies that were made and put into books done over at the court that handles probate and wills, and that is not a complete record of all the information that happened around the proving of the will authentic, which is known as the probate process. They have the will in that book, and they have a few notes from what's known as the surrogates court. It's called surrogates court. They have the court that handles probate in New York. But it's not everything there, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on. As I mentioned, original records can help you sort out people with the same name by providing distinguishing information about them that you may not find just by cutting and pasting or looking online. Looking at family trees, looking at the original records is going to tell you more information about these people. And relying on indexes to locate information, well, indexes can be wrong. So you very often want to look at the actual record instead of just looking at an index and seeing, oh, okay, so this person is listed in the index, and okay, that's good enough. No, you actually want to track down that record and find, again, not just the copy that's online, but where that copy came from. Original records can provide elusive dates. If you're looking at an abstract, a transcription, or an extract, it may be missing some information that's going to provide key information that you're going to need. Finding original names or original spellings of names. Of course, we've all run into cases where records have contained multiple spellings of a name within that record. Usually then in that case, we'll look at the signature. How did the person spell their own name? The emotional impact of original records. I work with people who, I bring out a record, I put it in front of them, and they burst into tears. And that's just so moving. And part of the job that I really enjoy is to see how people react to the records that they see, who are, that they have a direct connection to. These records document significant events in people's lives. Every record tells a story, and sometimes I find myself kind of getting lost in these records and thinking about, well, what was this person's life like, and what does this actually represent from their life, and oh, I wish I could find out more about them. What kinds of original records are available? On the left-hand side of the list, and you don't have to try to write these down, I'm sure you're familiar with a number of these anyway, but these are more common. On the right-hand side, and I provided this actually in a handout that Suzanne has that she can provide to you, are other types of records that you may not consider, but that also can contain information that can flesh out your search, provide, missing information, alternate sources of information. School district reports can work as an alternate to a census, mortgages if you can't find deeds, maps for helping place people. In New York, the towns kept books called records of live births. So if you can't track down a birth certificate, you can check with the local, the town's clerk's office and ask about the record of live birth book. legal notices, of course, in newspapers. We have incorporation records. The ones with stars are records that, types of records that we contain in our collection. The almshouse was the poorhouse that was run by the county. And we have some full intake records that provide a lot of information about people in those. So those are just to get you thinking about, well, why would I look for original records? What kinds of records are available? And these are the kinds of records that we work with on a regular basis. So again, this listing of records from our collection that are useful for genealogy, I have provided this listing in a handout for Suzanne to distribute to you, so you don't have to, again, try to write all of this down. As I mentioned, the county ran a poorhouse, an almshouse. It actually dated from before 1875. This is, the downside of records, especially because the, county clerk's office has existed since the late 1680s, but the archives was only created in 1985. What happened to a lot of these records? So we're glad for what we do have. We are aware that there's a lot missing that we should have and don't have. Keep hoping that someday some of these will turn up. But almshouse records can help you place people if you can't find them anywhere else. They may have lost their home and ended up in the almshouse. So that's one place to look. And I think we have the index on our website. Some of these are indexed on our website, some of them are not. But of course, you can always shoot me an email if you're looking at our website for records and you can't find the index on our website. Church and corporations. They, help place people. There are names of people who started the churches, and of course you get religious affiliation, which could lead you to church records if those are useful, and they often are. Court records, we have fragmentary records from 1768, a little bit before the Revolutionary War, but the courts were functioning in Westchester before the Revolutionary War. In 1847, New York State reorganized their entire court system, and then they started keeping full court cases. And why do we only have them up to 1911? There was a fire at the New York State Library in 1911, and a lot of records that the state was keeping were destroyed. Luckily, they were copies that the state had collected, so the original records still exist at the county level. So they passed a law saying the counties must keep these records forever, and that was another reason that Westchester decided to create the archives, was to have a central repository for all these older records from 1911 and earlier, and keep them, in good storage. The deeds, as I mentioned, 1684, those of course go up to the present. And they have all been digitized. So those are available through the county clerk's website. You can look at the index for free, but you have to pay to see the deeds, or of course you can contact us and we can help you out with that. Estate files, also known as probate papers, or you may, as I mentioned, come across the term surrogates in New York, because it's an old term that's still used today for the court that handles probate. It's known as the Surrogates Court in New York. Those holdings start in 1783 after the Revolutionary War, and we only have up to 1921, because by 1921 there are hundreds and hundreds of documents, and we don't have space to take in anymore, unfortunately. Wish we could. But of course, estate files, probate papers are very important for genealogy because they link generations. And our collection also includes guardianships and files for people who were intestate who didn't leave wills. So here's a couple of examples. This is what an almshouse intake record looks like. This one dates from 1872. It shows a death date, which sometimes death dates are difficult to determine, and you need them to be able to find a death record in New York. The towns file the records by, the significant date, and a little close-up tells you a little bit about the woman. She's from a respectable family. She was subject to having fits, so they placed her in the almshouse because they couldn't take care of her. and she was there for 10 years and died in 1882. This is a court record, and this is what I'm talking about if you wanted to see an example of a very fragile record. This took some careful handling to be able to digitize it, to be able to show it. So it's, kind of disintegrating along one side, and this is because of the storage it was in before it came here to the archives, where we take very good care of it now. But even just a brief overview of this record from 1795, Abraham Odell, because he was a juror, two things right off is that he was over the age of 21 and he owned property. To be able to be a juror, you had to be over the age of 21 and you had to own property. So even if before you read it, you already know something about him from that. This is a deed that I really like to show off because it documents property being purchased from the Native Americans. This was Katona Sagamore, who's a sachem, a chief, owned property up in the area that's now the town of Bedford, a section called Katona, which is named after him. To Jacob Van Cortlandt, the Van Cortlandt family owned the entire northern portion of Westchester County up until the early 1700s, when the Jacobs children started subdividing the property and selling it off in smaller portions. And here's a little close-up showing his name written out, Sagamore. He was also known as Sagamore. Sagamore is a historic name. Theodore Roosevelt's estate down in Long Island in Oyster Bay is called Sagamore. So he took a Native American name for his estate. And there's also a historic hotel up in the Lake George area known as the Sagamore. So it's a significant name. And here is his and some of the other chiefs, their specific little marks. They didn't use X's. They had characters that represented their names. This is a deed from a gentleman, African-American gentleman named Lewis Brady, a very interesting story of his life. He was an escaped slave who came up from Maryland, made his way to New York, worked as a riverboat captain, and saved enough money to be able to buy a property in Ossining, known as Sing Sing at that time because of the prison. It's right south of the prison. And here's his deed to his property. And it dates from 1836. And oops, what am I doing here? And here's a map just showing where his property was in the town of Ossining in an area called Sparta. Going on with the records, we have incorporation records, which show names of friends, relatives. They include fraternal societies. So, these are kind of alternate types of records. If you can't find names or information about people from official records, consider using sort of alternative sources like these incorporation records. Maps I showed, we have some that show property ownership and location of people. We do have some marriage records. It's a little bit of an anomaly because marriage records are actually not handled by the county. In New York State, they are a local function. They're handled by the towns and the cities, issue marriage licenses and keep them. But during the period of 1908 to 1935, the counties were receiving copies of marriage records. And they only did that for marriage records. I don't know why. And I don't know why we didn't also receive birth and death records as well, but we didn't, just got marriage records. But it's nice because it means that during that time period, there's a nice central location for them. They're all indexed. The index is on our website. And as you know, I'm sure marriage records are key because they link generations. They provide the parents' names for the brides and grooms and also witnesses who may have been family members or neighbors. Mortgage records, again, a function of the county clerk's office. Police people can give family relationships like deeds do. Naturalization records are also very important for genealogy because they will link generations as well. After 1906, they expanded the forms and they provide a tremendous amount of information, spouses and children and birthplaces, addresses and occupations. Earlier than that, unfortunately, they don't provide much personal information, but if it's an unusual name, it's still helpful for documenting that somebody was there and yes, they did become a citizen. Here's an example of a marriage record. This is Paul Robeson, the actor and singer. Paul Robeson. He was actually, if you look at it, he was a student at this time. And I'd forgotten, so I looked this up. He was actually a student at Columbia Law School. He earned a law degree in 1922, the year after he got married. And he and his wife came up to the village of Portchester, or town of Rye, to get their marriage license. This is a fun one, this naturalization record. This is one obviously after 1906 that has a lot of personal information. This gentleman's grandson contacted me because he had found out that his grandfather had been a stone carver who worked on Mount Rushmore and wanted to know if we had any records for him. And I found his naturalization record and was able to send it. And grandson was very happy to have it. And I thought, oh, this is a great one to show off in a genealogy presentation. And what I also have found very interesting about this one is, and this again was something that the family didn't know, he had come in through the Port of New York, but he lived in Vermont for a while and he filed an early declaration of intention, an early naturalization paper up in Vermont, and then moved back to New York and finished the naturalization process here in Westchester. This is an earlier naturalization record that does not have really any personal information. Again, because the name is unusual, it was helpful to the person, placing him here and showing that he had become a citizen. And I'm going to use him as an example of locating an elusive death date in a little bit. Continuing on with records, school census records. I think I may have mentioned that these can work as an alternate to a census record because they're local and they either name all the children in the school district by last name, or the records give the name of the head of the household with the number of children who were in the school district. So they provide a good alternate to the census. If you can't find census information, or can't find people in a census, or you just want to fill in between, the 10-year period. State census records, unfortunately, we don't have back earlier than 1905, but they are useful, again, for the same information that the federal census provides, and they provide people sort of midway through the decade. Voter enrollments, only from the 20th century, but they provide information on spouses, they locate people, providing an address. And wills, of course, like the estate files, the probate papers, are key for linking generations, listing family members, and providing names of relatives. Here's the cover of a school report. This is from Mamaroneck, which is in southern Westchester. And here you can see the names of the parents given, the head of the household, and the number of children in the school district. And Larchmont is a village in the town of Mamaroneck, so they're both listed in the same area because they're all Mamaroneck residents. They go by the town name. This is an interesting will. This is Charity Ferris, who freed her slaves in her will. This was 1816, 4 years before New York State abolished slavery in 1820. And what I like about this is that she names all her slaves. Very often in other records where slaves are given, their names are not given. So I like that she named Phoebe and Betty, Eliza, Elijah, and Abraham. Their names are given. So how do we locate original records? Well, as I mentioned, government offices are a great resource for original records because governments generate a lot of records. What's important to know is it's different in every state. Some states do not have county level of government, so who handles which functions is very important. And looking at the website of a government office can tell you which records they contain and which ones they're responsible for. And sometimes they will list what they have and who's responsible for what. Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper or contact them. But they are a great resource for original records. Sometimes local libraries will partner with government offices or other organizations and will contain local history records in their collection, or a town will have a historical society. Of course, as I mentioned, the Westchester County has a general historical society, which is a great resource and contains an excellent library, but a lot of towns have their own local historical societies as well. Bedford, for example, has an excellent collection of their own town records, as does the town of Eastchester. Some overlap with the county historical society, but that's never a bad thing because it's always good to be able to find things in more than one place. Of course, a place might have a local archive, or an organization will have its own archive of records. Colleges and universities, remember that very often people's personal papers the family will leave it, or they'll direct their family to leave it to their college or university. So if you're searching personal papers, rather than just looking at a local archive or library or historical society, if you know something about their life, you might consider looking at their college as well. Churches, of course, keep their own records. Cemeteries keep their own records. And there are private collections available. The Rockefeller family is located a little bit north of where we are located, and the Rockefeller Archive is there. And it's not just the family papers, it's the papers showing, all the organizations and all the functions that the Rockefeller family has been involved in, from their university to their medical, their overseas, all the efforts that they've done. The Van Cortlandt family, as I mentioned, they owned the northern portion of Westchester. And why is that significant? If you're not a Van Cortlandt, well, there were a lot of tenant farmers that worked their land, and the records of the rent rolls, the running of the estate, who had which farm, and how much area did it contain, what improvements did they do on the property. All of those activities could be documented in the family papers. And I don't think I remembered to write this down anywhere, but the Van Cortlandt family papers are with an organization called Historic Hudson Valley. So if you are researching Westchester and your family was located in northern Westchester and they were back any significant period, early 1700s or earlier, you might want to contact Historic Hudson Valley and see what they have on them in the Van Cortlandt family papers. Finding repositories, government offices, libraries, archives. Here's where the internet is a really powerful tool. As I may have mentioned, I think that Family Search, Ancestry, they're great tools. You can't rely completely on them for all your genealogy work. I think if you really want to fill out your family trees, verify all the information that you've collected, you really do need to go to original records. And locating where records are the internet is a great tool for that. It helps to know, have a plan, what kinds of records you are looking for will help determine where you look for them. Because as I mentioned, different levels of government handle different responsibilities, and where are those records located. Location, contact information, accessibility, all of that should be, and again, a lot of government offices should have a presence and a website by now with that information on it. There's also portal sites such as Cindy's List. Many of you may be familiar with that. That's an excellent resource for starting out where to look for different types of records. And record repositories, there's a central listing on the Library of Congress's website. It's known as NUCMUC, the National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections. And to search that, this link I've provided Suzanne again with a handout of these locating original records pages, which contains this link. And there's 3 lists at the top of the page. Searching an archive grid is at the bottom of the middle list. And that is a really useful tool for finding record repositories throughout the country. Locating original records, learning some history of the area is really useful. Am I getting a question?
No, I don't see anything in the chat. I think somebody just logged in a little late.
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind. I'll go on then. Learning some history of the area is very helpful if you're trying to locate original records. Knowing, for example, that the Westchester County Clerk's Office was established in 1683 tells you how far back our records go. Then there's actually quite a long gap. We have a few record books that date from the early to mid 1700s, but then the bulk of the records that we have really starts after the Revolutionary War, from 1783 up until the early 20th century. And as I mentioned, there was no surrogates court in Westchester before the Revolutionary War, so where were wills filed? They were filed with the surrogates court in New York City, and unfortunately I skipped one. So let me go back to pre-colonial Westchester. This is also important, as I was talking about the Van Cortlandt family. Westchester County was divided into 6 manors before the Revolutionary War up until, I would say, about the mid-1700s, which means that 4 families owned about half of the land in Westchester. That's a lot of land, and that means that there were a lot of tenant farmers on those properties. So if you're researching people and you can locate the family papers from the family that owned that manor where your ancestors worked as farmers, you may be able to find out something about them from that. In New York State, there are no official records before 1880. Why? I don't know. New York is sort of notoriously difficult for finding records, which is why I go over these kinds of things and tell people, you know, there's strategies and there's people available to help you try and figure out where records are. New York is just kind of a crazy state for trying to find records. You know, they kind of just left it up to the counties and however they wanted to do it. And by the 1880s, they really started to make it very important. Like, you've got to start keeping these official records. And I'm talking about like birth, death, and marriage records especially. There are some town clerks who did keep records prior to that, so you will sometimes get lucky, and the County Historical Society has some copies of record books that were being kept by enterprising clerks. But what do you do if you can't find official records? You know, I was talking about types of records that will fill in as an alternate. For example, if you're looking for a marriage notice or a death notice, those were often put into newspapers. Not many newspapers have been indexed for that. We have one at the Historical Society, one out of White Plains that was indexed for marriage and death notices. So newspapers work as a good alternate for official records, and also, of course, church records. You know, you can glean a lot of information from other types of records like deeds, wills, town minutes, and so on. It's also important to know such things like, well, does Westchester look exactly the same as it did all since, you know, 1683? No, it doesn't. The Bronx, what's now the Bronx, just north of Manhattan, was part of Westchester up until half of it was annexed by New York City in 1874 and half of it was annexed in 1895. So where did those records go? New York City should have them, and I know that there is a clerk in the municipal archives who is somewhat familiar with some of those early records. They've kind of left them in an office and haven't done a lot with them, but she does know how to search them if she's still there. I can provide you her contact information. Of course, prior to that, while the Bronx was part of Westchester, we have those records. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. How far does your town that you're researching date back? Was it formed from another town? The structure, of Westchester is a little bit confusing because there's towns within towns and villages within towns, and sometimes, is the record at the village level? Is it at the town level? It can be very confusing. So that's the sort of thing that I'm happy to answer and help you decipher. Patrick, the librarian from the Historical Society, also is a walking encyclopedia of Westchester trivia. So we're a resource for that. Of course, local librarians can help you too. So don't be afraid to contact people and ask about these types of questions. Learning again about structure of local government, who's responsible for what. As I mentioned, the state handles, the state gets copies of birth, death, and marriage records, but it's the towns, the villages, and the cities that issue them, and they also keep them at the local level as well. I'm not sure who gets the original and who keeps a copy. I really have to double check on that. But it's always, I think, better to try the local level first. They answer more quickly, and I think they don't charge as much as the state does. Property taxes, some court functions are local functions. There are village courts, there are town courts, there are county courts, there are state courts. So who's responsible for what? Generally, the more serious a charge is, the higher the court is going to be. There's a county court. We have a Supreme Court, which is a state court, but has a presence in each county. The Supreme Court handles more very serious situations like divorces and lawsuits involving higher amounts of money. The county court handles lesser amounts of money, less serious charges like misdemeanors. And then how accessible are they? Divorces are sealed for 100 years in New York, so we can get you a file number, but if it's from before 1921, you can access it. If it's after 1921, you won't be able to access it. Adoption records are sealed permanently in New York, but there are sometimes ways around that. So again, you have to ask questions. You have to contact people and ask questions. Deeds, wills, probate papers, naturalizations, court records are at the county level. Again, structure of Westchester is a little confusing, so I have provided a map that shows the towns within the towns and the villages within the towns to help you place where places are if you're researching Westchester. And also I've provided a list of local clerks' contact information. If you really want to dig into it, really finding some information elusive, it's worth looking at local histories. If you don't find the information you're looking for within the history itself, look at the introduction, look at the acknowledgments, look at the footnotes and the bibliographies. Where did the information come from? Did they glean this information from newspapers? Did they access a collection of local town minutes or somebody's personal papers? Did they conduct interviews? Where did the information come from? How far back does it go? Is it original information? Is it information that was compiled by somebody? So that's all useful if you're trying to locate information and you're having trouble locating it. Sometimes you can find it compiled in a local history. And the local library catalog is online. It's accessible. There's also a countrywide catalog through the OCLC. It's a library organization, and they run a catalog called WorldCat, and they will tell you if the book is in a university library or a local library system has it. Some of these local histories are also available on Google Books. Continuing on, did boundaries move? Upstate, for example, As counties became more populous, they sometimes split them up into two counties. So where did the records go from the earlier area? Once a new county was created, they would start keeping those records in that county. But if you are looking for earlier records, you would need to know that, for example, Putnam County was broken off from Dutchess County. That's just north of us. So the older records are all with the Dutchess County clerk, and I don't remember what date that happened, but the records from Putnam County are only going to exist back to when Putnam County was created, and that's the situation with several counties upstate that were broken off from other counties. So again, you have to keep that in mind. How far back did that county exist? And where was that territory taken off from, because that's where the older records are going to be. And I have some examples of that I'm going to talk about towns in Westchester too. Borders tend to be porous. Records are not always where you're going to expect them to be because, for example, the entire border between New York and Connecticut was disputed territory for decades. And a lot of the time, records that should have been in New York are in Connecticut and vice versa, because people were just not sure this year, where is the border? Or they went about their daily lives and they just filed records wherever it was convenient for them. Judges, lawyers, and ministers rode circuits. They crossed the state line, or they didn't know where the state line was, and filed records where it was probably convenient and safer for them to file them. So again, records tend to cross boundaries and not be too don't be too dogmatic about where it should be, and be open-minded about where else you could look in the area. We have records from Bedford that are in Connecticut, and Bedford is not that close to Connecticut, relatively speaking, but records were filed in Connecticut. Bedford has records that should be in Connecticut, so you do have to use some creativity. So here's the example. Here is the Connecticut-New York border. That upper portion, that strip is known as the oblong. It's about a 2-mile wide strip. It runs up into Dutchess County. That territory was in dispute between New York and Connecticut for about 150 years, from the 1730s up until the 1880s. So that's what I'm talking about. And you can see where Bedford is a little bit east of that, but that's how far ranging the confusion about records. They could be south of that or east of that. And again, so check in Connecticut if you're not finding things in New York. And down as far as Rye, if you can see where Rye is, that border was in dispute from 1660s up until about 1700. Again, New York and Connecticut fought over that territory, and so again, records that should be in Rye or Harrison are in Connecticut, and vice versa. Here's something to keep in mind that I was talking about with towns coming off from towns or being contained within towns, villages being contained within towns. We even have a city, Peekskill, which is now a city, which it incorporated as a city in 1940. It formed a separate city, came off of the town of Cortland. Prior to that, the records for Peekskill, because it was a village within the town of Cortland, so those records from Peekskill are with the Cortland town clerk. After 1940, when Peekskill incorporated as a city, then it started keeping its own records. So if you are looking for family that was located in the Peekskill area, you're not going to find them in the city of Peekskill. City of Peekskill's not going to have them. They're with the town of Cortland. And this is a really interesting case. Mount Kisco has been called Mount Kisco since it's a Native American, adapted from the Native American names of the area. But it didn't incorporate as a town until 1978. And we were looking for deeds, forgetting that it was a pretty recent town, couldn't find them, and discovered that, oh, right, they're not going to be in the deeds index under Mount Kisco because Mount Kisco didn't officially exist as its own entity, political entity, until 1978. So the deeds would have been filed. Everything from that dividing line, east of that would be in Bedford, and west of that would be in the town of Newcastle. So you have to know this to be able to find records from Mount Kisco. They're either going to be with, in the case of the deeds, they're going to be in the deeds index by town, or town records would be with the town of Bedford. Other records would be with the town of Newcastle. So as I've been stressing, please feel free to speak to people who know something about local history. I'm always happy to answer questions about if you're having difficulty locating records. If I don't know the answer, I will give you my best guess. Records are often in unexpected places. As I mentioned, they cross borders. The county has some marriage records, even though they're a local function. Another example is that some of the towns kept their own deeds. It's supposed to be a county function, but early on, we're talking about the 1700s, early 1800s, travel was not easy. People didn't want to go to White Plains or couldn't get to White Plains to record a deed with the county clerk's office. If they did not do that, we don't have a copy of it. And some towns were keeping their own deeds. So towns such as Rye and Mamaroneck, and some people also somehow went to Albany and recorded their deeds with New York State. So we don't have everything that we should have, and there are sometimes alternate places to look. There's also unrecorded deeds. There's a manuscript somebody wrote up, and somehow it never made its way into an official collection. So sometimes you will find such records in manuscript collections, such as the Westchester County Historical Society. In their manuscript collection, there are some unrecorded deeds and wills. And then talking about overcoming brick walls. My first suggestion with overcoming a brick wall is to question any assumptions that you're making. And one example I have of that is that I had a question from someone who had found information about a man named Abraham Odell on Ancestry. She suspected that two people with the same name had been mixed up. She was trying to find, she was descended from the second marriage of this Abraham Odell, and she wanted to find out, whatever information she should get. She had a will for him. She wasn't sure it was the right person. So I looked at a book called Granville Mackenzie's Families of the Colonial Town of Phillipsburg, which is very good listing of genealogies for families from the town of Phillipsburg. That's sort of the central section of Westchester. And that broke up after the Revolutionary War. Again, a lot of tenant farmers on that property. I could not find an Abraham Odell with a wife. I think the name was Sarah. So there were two candidates, and I looked at their wills, and I confirmed that neither one had a second wife. Both men had predeceased their wives. And I was able to confirm that because both wives had left wills and had estate files that dated past the husbands. So what we were able to determine from that was that she was not descended from an Abraham Odell who lived in the Westchester branch of the family. She was also researching a branch of the family that was up in the Albany area, and so that way she was able to determine that she must have been descended from somebody from that other branch of the family. So we didn't find her an absolute answer, but at least we were able to eliminate something and kind of put her back on track. An elusive death date. I mentioned we showed you the naturalization record for this John Henf, and we were able to find his death date. He actually ended up in the almshouse, and we were able to find not an intake record for him. We have an index that goes later than the intake records. So that's another thing to consider, that even if a collection has records, if they have an index that covers more, a greater time period than the records themselves, always take time to look at those indexes, because sometimes those indexes will contain some information that's useful to you, even if you can't get a full record. We had an interesting case where someone was researching, trying to find a will for someone, and we looked through everything we could think of: New York Genealogical and Biographical Society's record, periodicals, manuscripts, and we could not find the will. So we started looking at deeds, and it turned out that this gentleman had used a deed as a substitute for a will and eliminated the probate process by listing all his property and all his children in his deed and everything he wanted to leave to them. And he did it in a deed instead of a will. So it was an interesting, unusual case. And on Ancestry and Family Search, they have wills, copies of wills. Those were taken from the court clerk's book, the copies that the court clerks made of wills, and they contain some of the details of the probate process, but not all the papers. So if you have a will and you're looking for more information on the family or about the person, contact us, because we may have the full file, which is going to have a lot more paper and a lot more information and may contain more names than what you're finding on Ancestry or Family Search. Here's John Henth. He's the third line down. This is the index from the almshouse records, and there his elusive death date turned up. So that led her to being able to find his death record. So this is just some general information that I always stress. Please document where you found records. Very often people will send me copies of records that they found online and said, oh, do you recognize these? Or these from your collection? And sometimes I can say, yes, I do recognize this, and yes, they copied this from us. But in other cases, I don't recognize them. I don't know what they are. So if you're putting something online, please include the source. If you're making a photocopy, please write the source on the photocopy. If you're taking a photograph of something, copy or photograph the title page of where you took the information from. It's also helpful to keep a log of where you've been. If you've been to a record repository, a library, if you've spoken with someone and they gave you information, keep a log of that so that you remember where that information came from. Because if you come here, do research, you call me 3 weeks later and say, oh, I have this document and I don't remember where it came from. I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. If you send me a copy of it, I might be able to figure it out, but I can't promise that. So it's always a good idea to document it at the time. And keep in mind that repositories are run by volunteers in some cases or part-time staff. We're kind of an unusual case to be a full county archive with full-time staff. So they may not have as many hours, they may not be as convenient, especially now. A lot of places, including us, have reduced hours. So if you're planning to visit someplace, especially if you're going to another town or another state, call or email first and just confirm the hours, confirm the days of the business that they're open for research. Don't waste your time. It breaks my heart when people come here and just show up and I really can't do much for them because I don't have volunteers on certain days. Certain things are not accessible on certain days. I'll, do what I can because I love to help people with genealogy, but it's really best to do your homework beforehand and make sure you're coming on the right day. And then just visiting etiquette. We do a lot in conjunction with Society of American Archivists guidelines or county guidelines for use of records or taking information in a registration form, using pencil instead of pen, so on and so forth. So just please follow those guidelines. A lot of information that I have provided has come from these lovely people that I've been in contact with over the years. I just wanted to give them some acknowledgement. And again, this contact information is in a handout that I provided to Suzanne. So, and our reading room is open now. COVID constrictions in place, but we are open Wednesdays by appointment. If you're going to be in the area, please feel free to make an appointment, come in and work with us. Thanks for your time. Does anybody have a question?
Okay, class, if you have a question, go ahead and unmute your microphone and please feel free to ask. or if you prefer, if you're a little shy, you can put it in the chat box. I'll see the little pop-up if you put it in the chat box. And in the meantime, Jackie, do you mind going directly, since you're sharing your screen, do you mind going directly to your website and kind of navigating and showing the students, step by step how to get, to drill down to where all these things are?
That's really, I should have thought of that. Okay. So this is our index page on our website. I believe I put the URL for our website in that handout that has the contact information. And so if you scroll down, there's a picture of the Historical Society's card catalog. They do still have an original, actual wooden card catalog for their library. And here is a list of indexes. We've got cemetery records, which are veterans from the American Revolution up to World War I, because it was a WPA project that was compiled in the 1930s. Those have actually all been digitized and are available on our digital website, which I've also provided the URL on that handout. We've got the court records, which were all indexed by last name, and they indexed everybody. So regardless of what their role in that court record was, whether they were a juror or someone suing somebody or a witness, they're all listed in there. That's great because everybody's listed, but on the other hand, sometimes you're getting less information than you're hoping out of them. Estate inventory records are the estate files. That index is, I think it's up to 1916 now. We have the records up to 1921, but not all of them. The full index has not been put online yet. We're still working on that. We have wonderful volunteers working on that. Incorporation records, as I mentioned, we've got those indexed by both the people listed in them and by the company or church name or organization name. Jail blotter books, I'm not really sure why we have those, but yeah, if you have a black sheep in your family, they are partially indexed. I forget what year we're up to with those. Oh, I guess it's up to 1938. We have years beyond that, but there's sort of a loose state law that they have to be sealed for 75 years, so we kind of go along by that. Marriage records that we have, again, fully indexed by both bride and groom. Miscellaneous records could be anything, that's a last name index. The naturalization records are indexed by last name. The wills, we have some original wills. We don't have every original will, but we have an estate inventory, a probate file for. But we do have a number of original wills. And then the professional registers we had indexed to. They could be horseshoers, they could be engineers, they could be podiatrists. I forget what else is in there. Those are kind of fun. And then there's more to do with just sort of county functions down here. Oh, and the school reports they've put under there too. The school reports that I mentioned that could work as an alternate census. And then we've got several atlases and maps, which are also available on the digital website. So let me show you. Here's the marriage record. And so you would click on search index, and then you just put in a name. Let's put in the last name Smart. And it'll come up with everyone whose last name was Smart. Here's the certificate number. This is our certificate number that was assigned by the county clerk's office when they received the record. Sometimes if you find this record listed on Ancestry or Family Search, they're going to give the state's certificate number. People often will send that to us, and then we have to come to this and find our own number to be able to locate the record. So it's helpful to us if you make that extra step and look at our index. It's not, vitally necessary. We can still find it, but we appreciate if you make that extra step. So, and just to keep things interesting, the county clerk's office, for some reason, started the numbering over again in 1926. So we have one set of records that run from 1 up to 50,000 something that run from 1908 to 1926. And then in the middle of 1926, we've got the numbering starts over again from 1 and goes up to 40,000 something that ends in 1935. So it's helpful if you provide the year of the record as well too, just to make sure. I mean, we always double check to make sure we send you the right record, but just, it's one of those quirks of our system. And then going back, here is our, this actually takes you to the
Jackie, do you mind? I think you kind of hit on something that might be of interest to the students.
Oh, sure.
The jail blotter books. I think,
yeah.
Actually, one of my most popular presentations I do out in the community is how to find your bad boy ancestor.
Yeah. Okay.
And maybe we can just spend a little bit of time on that.
Sure. They don't actually provide a tremendous amount of information. And of course, this index only has the name. Oh, no, I'm wrong. Wow, I haven't looked at this in a while. See, I forget these things, so I have to refresh my memory. This is not the entire record. It's the juicy part of the record. It's, what they were charged with, where they were, what date they were received into the county jail, what day they were discharged. The record will usually contain other information, like whether or not they were married, whether or not they were employed at the time, what their occupation was, probably, I think, the age is in here. And if it was a serious offense and they were sent on somewhere like Sing Sing or another state prison, would usually say that. If they were released or the charges were dismissed, it will say that as well. Because of the way those records are set up, they're on large books that spread way out, and it's just one single skinny line that runs across, and it's very hard to just scan that one line. This is a rare case where we would actually provide a transcription. I double check it, and then I have somebody else double check it to make sure all the information is accurate before we send it to you, though. So we make sure that we send you accurate information.
And you said something about 75 years, so you have to wait past 75 years from the date they were, discharged, in order to be able to see the original record?
Yes. Yeah. Because it's something that we found, a quirk of the court system. They like these things, even though people are probably long deceased. They like them to be sealed. Probably 75 being, I guess, the average lifetime at some point. Make sure the person is deceased, so this information isn't going to harm them. Although people usually find it more of a curiosity now rather than like, oh dear, my person was in jail. So we actually don't even have anything more recent than 75 years indexed on here.
So if you walked in, you would not be able to see them if it was under the 75 years.
Yeah,
we would not have access.
That's a question that I get asked quite often, and whenever we call and ask anybody in the law department about that, they always say, "Oh yeah, we'll get back to you," and then they never do. So they kind of leave it up to us, and we're sort of like, it's a state law, it's a tough one to know what to do with, because in most cases the person is long deceased, but on the other hand, it is a state law. So with
the FOIA request with the FBI, if the person is deceased and you provide proof, you can get their FBI file through FOIA.
Okay, well that's good to know, because if you provide me with the FOIA request, then I will, do my due diligence and answer the question to the best of my ability. I wish we could get a better answer about that. I wish somebody in the law department would just say, yeah, if the person's dead, don't worry about it. But they never want to do that. So, they leave it up to us, and then, us poor archivists, we're not really sure what to do. So.
I know a lot of the people in my class, some of their goals is to join lineage societies. Out of all of your record collections, specifically for like Civil War, for instance, what record sets would you recommend that they use off your website?
For,
let's say they're interested in a Civil War ancestor.
we don't have much. The Revolutionary War, of course, was local to us. The Civil War was really not. There were people from Westchester who, of course, did fight in the Civil War. We don't really have much on that other than the Veterans Cemetery cards. In that case, I would refer you to the Historical Society. Patrick is a little better versed in military history, the librarian from the Historical Society, than I am. He he has a really good reference for the Grand Army of the Republic records. There's I think, a local organization that has some records that I'd have to get that information from him about that. And then they've just got information on families and periodicals and manuscripts, which is more personal information that would give some information about, who fought in the war and what their role was. But unfortunately, the county did not document that well. Those cemetery cards were sort of compiled. Like I said, it was the WPA project, and they kind of compiled that from whatever sources, newspapers or other personal information they were able to glean. But there's no one central group of records within the county that documents, for example, Civil War veterans.
You mentioned something earlier, and I think it piqued the interest of some of the class, because sure. I did one comment in the chat box from Brenda. She said, regarding scanned images of documents on Ancestry and Family Search, are these not images of the original documents in some instances? Because I think you had mentioned that maybe perhaps not all the entire file was copied and put onto these websites.
That's right. It really depends on the record, of course, but Family Search partnered with the archives back in the 80s. They created the microfilm index for our estate files probate records, which, because they did it in the 80s, our copy only runs up to 1984. And then they digitized a number of these record books that the clerks from the surrogates court had copied the wills out by hand, and then included some of the notes from the probate file. But it is not the complete file. They didn't put all. In rare cases there are, but in most cases it's just a few pages. So those are available online, and it's great that you can get that. You can get the will and you can get some of the probate information, but generally you're not going to get the entire file. So if you think that I would, as a general matter of course, is just ask us, do we have a file? If it's a huge file, we probably won't be able to copy the whole thing, just because of time constraints and staffing limitations. But if you can come into the area, I mean, we can certainly pull the file out for you and take pictures of everything. So yeah, there are cases where what you're getting online is not going to be the complete file. And in that case, it's not the original because it's the court's copy of it.
And I bet you that's come as a surprise to at least some of the people in class today, because I know I've gotten all kinds of stuff on wills off of Ancestry from my ancestors, but I went on the assumption that they were complete copies of the packets. But now I'm going to have to go back and readdress that. Yeah,
it's generally the full will, but it's not the full probate file. And then of course there are I believe Family Search has that microfilmed index because that's why they created it. They gave us a copy and they kept a copy. It's a series of, they just microfilmed the index cards that used to be the old index. There are cases where if there's no file, or if the file disappeared, because these records used to be over in the courthouse before they came to the archives and anybody had access to them, and unfortunately portions of files or entire files disappeared. So we know there was a file, but we no longer have it. The only copy left is that one in the court's books, copy books. And I don't know how many of those they digitized. I don't know if they missed pages, but I have had people contact me and say, well, of course, if someone left a will, then there would be a copy of the will in there. But there's also, okay, I'm getting things mixed up, I'm sorry. So in some cases, they either missed pages, and so they don't have the complete thing that's the only copy that still exists, is the copy that's in those books. Conversely, too, if you look online in that index with the index cards, I hope you're following me. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place. You're going to see the word intestate in some, which means that there is no will. So then you're not going to find a will for that person from those books that were digitized, and you would have to contact us for the file, because that's the only thing that exists, because then the court would have had to appoint an administrator to disperse the estate, and those papers are not in those copies, those books.
Wow, that's
Is that
great.
clear? Does that make sense? I'm sorry, it kind of makes two
No,
things.
it does. Yeah,
Okay.
like I said, it certainly came as a surprise to me. Now, when I just did a real quick Wikipedia reading of the history of Westchester County, I noticed that you have a lot of Dutch history and railroad history. Uh,
Yes.
and can you kind of, if you have anything on those two collections there, maybe you could touch on that?
Um, the railroads, we have probably some incorporation records for. We actually also have the original surveyor's drawings from the 1830s for the New York Hudson, I think it was the New York Hudson and Central Railroad that ran along the Hudson River. It's now the Hudson River line of the Metropolitan Transit Authority, the line that runs down into New York City and finalizes in Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan, which was one of the original railroad lines. We don't have, as far as I know, any of the other two lines. I think we have something on something what was known as the old Putnam line that ran up into Brewster, which the county turned into a bike trail, and it's known as the North County Trailway. But the early records from that, I think we have a lot of stuff that has not been processed because we haven't been asked for it. I believe we have some probably court records. Trying to remember if it was a trolley line. Again, these are the kinds of things that our holdings are kind of spotty for things like that because it was sometimes stuff that wasn't handled locally. It had more to do with New York City than with us. Of course, if there was a court case, if there was like a railroad accident and it was tried in New York, in Westchester, we of course would have that court case. As far as records of the railroads, it really would depend. I'd have to look and see if we had an incorporation record, like I said, or whether we have those surveyor records, what shows up on maps. Do we have any photographs? And then I could also, check with Patrick from the Westchester Historical Society because people love railroads. They have some real diehard railroad aficionados who have compiled scrapbooks on railroads. They also have photographs. They have the newspapers, and I'm trying to think. There's another thing that's at the back of my mind. I'm thinking probably books. Books on local history. There's actually a couple of telephone directories too that follow some of the railroad lines too, so that you know who lived in that area around by a certain railroad line.
Okay.
But again, that's Historical Society, not us. But, I'm always happy to refer. We cross-reference people all the time.
You mentioned
Is that helpful?
Oh, yeah, yeah. You mentioned earlier about state census. I have found that New York is sometimes the hardest state to research, not for federal records, but for those state level records.
Yes.
Finding a website that will offer you the state census records, is really spotty.
Yeah.
Now, I assume when you said that you had the state census records that you're referring just for Westchester County only, not for the entire state. Okay.
Correct. Yeah,
So,
and we only have 1905, 1915, and 1925. As far as I know, there was no state census that was done for Westchester earlier than that. If it was, and as far as I could tell, it wasn't, we don't have them. So, sorry, go ahead.
Well, my follow-up question would be, so if you really wanted that state census record, you would reach out to the county archives office for that particular county in New York?
I would try that, or you could also try the New York State Archives. New York State Archives is a great resource.
Great. Okay. And of course that, kind of follows up with an enumeration map question. Do you have enumeration maps for the state census?
That's a good question. I don't think we do. I know we have election district maps. I don't think we have enumeration maps. If you want to shoot me an email about that, I can follow up on that. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking we don't, or if we do, the holdings are very spotty on that because I don't.
Yeah, because I'm finding a lot of my students, after they find their ancestor on the census, they want to find out where in the city that exactly was, because it's not always a street address on the census. Sometimes it's just a district and a house number on the census. So the enumeration maps become, a little bit more important with more advanced research techniques.
There are some local maps that will show like wards, like in Yonkers, some of the bigger cities will show the wards that they. And I'm not sure, though, again, whether those are political or whether they followed the same ones for the census. I'm not really clear on that. I'm sorry. I can dig into that a little bit to be able to answer that question a little better.
Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry.
So once again,
there are some areas where I'm not as strong.
Oh, that's okay. No, we really appreciate what you've done for us so far. So class, do you have any questions? We did have that one in the chat box, but please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask Jackie a question directly. She's a wealth of knowledge.
I'm always happy to follow up. If you want to shoot me an email later, that's perfectly fine. I'm here and I'm happy to answer questions. Oh, you also asked about Dutch records. We don't really have records because, like I said, most of what we have, except for the deeds and a few like tax records from property owners and people who are involved in keeping up the quality of the roads. The majority of what we have starts after the Revolutionary War. But the Dutch records, I know, if anybody's familiar with Russell Shorto's wonderful book, Island at the Center of the World, he talks about, in the introduction, about the discovery of a treasure trove of early Dutch records from the, not just New Amsterdam colony, but also what included Westchester. Those are actually all with the state archives. So if you're looking for earlier records and Dutch families from the area, Historical Society is probably more likely to have some of that earlier records than the archives is. But again, I'm happy to cross-reference. If you want to shoot me a question about it, I will figure out who to refer you to if it's something we don't have.
Excellent. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's a lot of wonderful information. It's a lot to comprehend.
Yes, I know. I covered a lot of ground.
Yes. Just because so many people came through New York and the state and things like that. You cover Long Island and Nantucket also?
Long Island is not part of Westchester.
Okay.
We do have, the Historical Society, again, has some family genealogies that will mention that a family came from Long Island and then maybe up into Westchester. So they will talk about the origin of the family, how they came from England or Holland or wherever, and were briefly in Long Island, and then one branch of the family stayed there, and another branch of the family moved to other areas. So again, I would refer you to Historical Society if that's the case.
Okay, yeah, because some people did go into the Westchester, and I just didn't know how far it branched out. So I could follow them then there. And the thing is to use your website to try to find all this information first, and then perhaps call you if we're running into dead ends. Is that right? I'm trying to follow what's the best.
Yeah, I would say take a look at the website. I mean, the majority of the records that we have for genealogy, like I said, other than the wills and the deeds, a lot of it does not go as far back as many people. Once you're getting into the early 1700s, we don't really have that much because county government didn't really exist, and so the records would either be with New York City or Albany. But So if it's not the right time period, like I said, I'm happy to have you send me a question, and then I'll figure out who to refer you to.
Uh-huh. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to let the class know that Jackie did provide 5 handouts, and you should have gotten all 5 handouts in your email from me this morning. If your email provider does not allow you to get that large of a email because of the handouts that were attached, if you did not get all 5, shoot me a private email. Don't do it through the chat box, please. Send it to me through the email and let me know which ones you got, and then I'll know which ones you didn't get, and I'll be more than happy to send it back as a separate email. So if you did not get all 5 handouts, please let me know.
Yeah, I'm kind of zealous about handouts. Well, because I feel like, some of the information, rather than having people, because I've been to, presentations where you're like frantically trying to write the information down, and then people, oh yeah, I have this in a handout. So, oh shoot, I don't have to try to write it all down.
And then also I wanted to because we do have a couple new people here in class today. If you want, you can download the chat box. If you just click on the chat box icon at the bottom of your screen, and at the very lower right-hand corner of your chat box, there should be 3 little dots. And if you click on those 3 little dots, it'll allow you to save the chat onto your computer. Because if you leave today and if you meant to do it and don't do it, once you sign off, you won't be able to log back in and grab that chat box. So please, if there's something in the chat box that you wanted, please do so now and go ahead and download that chat box. And anybody else have any questions? We still got quite a few people logged in.
If not, do you want me to show you the deeds index on the county clerk's website and our digital website?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so to get to the deeds index, you would go to the county clerk's website. I don't think I provide this link, but if you Google them, Westchester County Clerk, it's going to take you to this link. And so here's our lovely county clerk, Mr. Idoni. Down here, you would click on under his portrait, Records Online. And this is a subscription service. You can pay $20 per day to look at the deeds, but you have access to the index for free, actually. So you would just go over here to Land Records, click on Search. There's 2 sections to this, which every system. This is much better than the system they used to have. I have to tell you, it's still a little bit clunky, but it's much better than it used to be. This section that comes up first, of course, is the one that gets used most these days, but it only covers from 1966 to the present. What you want to do is you want to go to this tab, this secret little tab, the index books. This is the tab, the section that covers from the 1680s up to 1966. The oldest part of the index is completely alphabetical by last name. They compiled this index from a number of other index books that were done by town, and they created a master list in 1899. So all you have to tell it is the name and whether you want to search the person as the seller or the buyer of property. You don't have to put in any other information. And then you click search. And then this is basically just repeating the information that you put in over here. This is not your results. What it's doing is it's bringing up the file that has the index pages, because what they did was they compiled this from the actual index pages from these index books, which we have the originals of those index books. So what you'll do is you click on this little yellow box, and then it's going to bring up, you see the image of the index pages, alphabetical by last name, and then under the last name it's alphabetical by first name, and then it's chronological by the date that the deed was recorded with the county clerk's office. And sometimes it took days, weeks, months, even years for someone to bring something in. I've seen records, I found records that I no date back to the 1680s, and for some reason it wasn't recorded for generations. So the date on it is going to be like 1830, but the record actually dates from 1680 something. That's a rare case. And as you'll see as you look through, the majority of the records do date from, I would say, mid-1800s up, more recent, but you will find some that date earlier. Just like I said, a lot of people did not bring the records to the county clerk's office to have them recorded earlier on because of travel or, you know, whatever obstacles were in their way. Certainly from the more prolific families like the Purdy's, the Smiths, the Browns, the Underhills, you're going to find stuff in there from other families, you know, maybe not. But anyway, that's how that works. And what you're interested in is the librarian page number, these last two columns over here. Because once you have that information, then you can go and look it up under search by number. And again, you have to tell it whether it's searching pre-1967 or post-1967. We're not going to be able to get to it from this because I'm in the, you know, just the search. You'd have to sign up for an account and pay the $20 for a day's access. So what you would do is you would go through the index, you record all the records you want to see, pay the fee, and then you can print or download as much as you want, or you can contact us. But our fee for research is actually costs more than what they charge. So this is actually, if you're doing property research in Westchester, this is a great tool. And concurrent with that, this is a really great place to start because we have some atlases that show, like I showed with Louis Brady's property, show property ownership. So you can look and see what an area looked like, and you're going to get the names of some of the property owners. So you can place people concurrent, sort of loosely, you know, depending on the date of the deed, with might give you a place to start in the deed index if you know you don't want to start from the present day and have to do a search back to 1867. You can hop on the atlas and see, you know, if you can find their name on the atlas and work from that time period, from a date, from an area, because sometimes the houses are still there and you can locate them. So if that's helpful, because we do get actually
Jackie, so this map that you're showing right now, the names that appear on this map, the first and last names of these are all registered property owners at that time?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know whether these people actually had their properties, the deeds registered. I believe they may have gotten this information. The surveyors may have supplied this information when they created the map. That's a good question. I had not thought of that.
So it might be based on residents who lived there at the time of the map rather than property owners.
Correct. That's a very good distinction. Yeah. People who were living there as opposed to maybe, you know, they were renters as opposed to...
the reason I asked you, excuse me.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, I'll tell you why, because I had an ancestor in Vermont and I found his name on a map very similar to this. But when I contacted the county to see if he had any property records, they could not find a property record, but yet his name was plainly on the map.
Huh. You know, that may explain, I had not thought of that. And then I don't know who compiled that information of who was living there or who owned the property. That's a really important distinction, and you know, thank you. I've learned something from you. That's to keep in mind. Wow.
And of course, these maps are free on the archives page, right? You can access them for free.
Yes.
Because I know you can buy these kinds of maps on like Amazon and eBay, and they charge, you know, but I mean, what a wonderful thing to know that you can get these for free.
Yes, this is a map in our collection, and we've digitized, I forget how many atlases. There's the 1867, 1881, 1901, 1910, and 1930 are on this website. Plus, there's several other maps that we digitized because we got a grant several years ago to digitize some really of the pretty early maps from the county clerk's collection that are on this website as well. And we also have a number of photographs on this site, but the photographs, of course, date generally from the 1930s, 1920s through the 1940s, and it's mostly of people using county parks. So they're not going to be too helpful for genealogy. Again, that would be something you'd be more likely to find in the Historical Society's collection.
So the website we're on right now is the one we should go to look for a variety of information. The Westchester.com or westchestergov.com.
Collections.westchestergov.com. I've put this in the contacts handout. This is our digital website. But again, keep in mind this is county government, county related. So it's not, broad Westchester history like the Historical Society. The Historical Society also has a digital website. I put their contact information for their digital site and their website on the contact sheet as well. And if you're looking for, say, even if you're doing property research, you want to see if there's a photograph of the house that you're researching, Historical Society site might have it because they have a lot of street views in their collection. Not all their photos have been digitized, though, but a good number of them have.
That's helpful because my family was the Underhill family.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of history back there.
Some of their maps, too, have etchings of really elegant or prominent houses sort of around the perimeter of the map. So if you can find some of those maps, sometimes you can find a building that you're interested in that way, too. They just have the etchings that were done if there's no actual photograph of it.
So that's the Historical Society.
That's the County Historical Society, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, any last minute questions? Give it just a few more moments. And what I'm going to do is I want to let the class know that after we sign off with our guest speaker today, the class will go on for about another hour. And so if you have a tree that you want to work on and present it to the class, we can all work on your tree together and try to hopefully get through your brick wall. Please feel free to stay. And once again, I want to welcome the new people today. And of course, Brenda, you're more than welcome to stay as well. I hope you do, because that's probably one of, I think, my favorite parts of the whole class every week is when we all just kind of get to know each other better and work on our trees. Oh, hold on. We got one thing in the chat box here. Hold on. Oh, yes, Betty. Okay. Yeah, same thing. Betty was just talking about how her family is the Underhill family. Okay. All right. With that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And with that, Jackie, I'm going to say thank you very, very much for a wonderful presentation. And if my class has any questions, they can reach out to you directly. And I'm sure they will.
Yeah, and thank you for raising some questions that I still have areas where I need to learn things. So that's always,
Well, wonderful. Then I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And once again, thank you very much. And Jackie, I will be sending you the link to the recording. And I wanted to say thank you so much for allowing us to record. And it'll be on our YouTube channel. It usually takes a couple weeks before it gets on the YouTube channel. Okay. But I'll follow up with you with the direct link. So if you'd like to watch it, you're more than welcome to.
Oh, yeah. No, I always learn from that. So it's always good. Thank you. No, thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and your time and your good questions. And yeah, I mean, there's always more to learn. So but it's fun. And thanks for your interest in Westchester County. Thank you for Suzanne for setting this up. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.